Good morning. I am so excited about this change in tax rules here in Zurich. And I'm very happy that many of you are as well, obviously, or at least curious why me and many of us here are so excited about these changes. My name is Leo Capretz. I'm co-founder and CEO of Brainforest, the first venture studio for forests. Now, I will share with you in a minute why I'm so excited about this. And also, I have a confession to make. But first, let's see you on the menu for this morning. Voila. So, by the way, menu, there is lots of only vegan options for breakfast. Please help yourself. We reduced deforestation with our vegan breakfast options, fully in our topic, obviously. So on the content side this morning, we will have a quick look back on what the situation was before this change, but then mainly obviously look at this amazing revolution that happened here in Zurich around the tax exemption rules. And then together with Aunnie Patton Power, we will look at the exciting new options that this offers now for foundations here and other tax exempt structures here in Zurich. Now, why am I so excited and let's say euphoric about this change? Well, I have been working on this for more than 15 years. In 2010, I finished my master's at the University of St. Gallen in law and economics. And my master thesis was on the legal framework for social entrepreneurship. This is 2010, and this was still the early days. My conclusion basically was, well, you have non-profit law, mainly tax exemption rules. You have business law, and you kind of have to take from both a little bit, mix it, and hope that something that you can deal with comes out of it. You have to be a very creative cook to put it together. And often the outcome was not ideal. You kind of be stuck between the for-profit and the non-profit world. And I thought that this topic is really important, so I was even starting to work on a PhD under Dominique Jacob, the professor at the Foundation Law Center, University of Zurich. Many of you know him. And the topic was foundations coming together with startups. And startups, always no money, and foundations normally having an endowment. So it's kind of a clash of different realities. And what I looked at is, what are the different roles that a foundation can take if you have a startup? Kind of the grandmother or mother, here you have money type of relationship, or then rather kind of the stingy brother, sister, what, you're coming again and ask for money? So there are different relationships that foundations, roles can take with startups. And by now you might get that I'm a little bit too creative to write a PhD in law. Thanks, Mom. She is always drawing, and by the way, also did these illustrations. I think I got some creativity from your side. Now, I was also very frustrated because I was not only doing this theoretically, because I was more kind of also the practical person. So for many structures, I tried to get tax exemption. I was a founding member of Impact Hub here in Zurich, and then we tried to launch an early stage impact investment fund called Viaduct Ventures. And there I got a 30-page answer from the city of Zurich why they opposed to us getting the tax exemption. So many years of pains in this topic, and then started to work on Brainforest. And I said, no way I tried this in Zurich. So we went to Zug, rented office space in Zug. And there it also took a year, but we got the tax exemption for Brainforest. They had internal meetings about Brainforest in the tax authorities of Zug to kind of understand what we want to do. And in the end, they gave us the tax exemption. So I was like, okay, this works now. I buried my PhD. This is, by the way, not my confession yet. And then was building Brainforest for 4 years now. And the foundations, there are many foundations here that actually work with us. They are brave because many other foundations, they were kind of sitting on the fences, seeing if this really works. Is it actually legal to do with grants, building startups? Is all kind of weird. So when this news came out in February this year, that in Zurich now these entrepreneurial funding models are allowed, well, I was going nuts. And you can ask the Brainforest team. I was talking only about this for days. You know now why, because I went through lots of pains in this topic. So let's have a look at where we come from in this topic and kind of why also this was so complicated. Well, if you look at foundation, there is two buckets of money. One is on the investment side, where you try with bonds, Eikenosse, whatever, ETFs, you try to make money with the endowment, to then give away, and that's on the other side. And from the financial perspective, a grant is a minus 100% return on investment because you give the money away. And the authorities, the tax authorities, and also the Foundation Oversight Board, the Stiftungsaufsicht, they were very, very strict that it has to stay minus 100%. If you take money in the grant bucket, you give it away and it cannot come back. There is no way money can come back. And it was very strict. It was like panic mode if money would come back. Now, what is the reason for that? No, they're not just mean people. So the reason was exactly the issue that you could have a foundation just giving free or very cheap money to startups or other companies, and they would have a competitive advantage towards other startups that don't have this access to cheaper or free capital. So with the avoidance of a distortion of the market, or because the authorities want Wettbewerbsneutralität, so neutrality of competition, it was very strict that foundations, they cannot act kind of as investors. Now, the big change, beginning February this year. So what is the change? Well, the change is now that this one-way street suddenly is gone, and actually foundations or other tax-exempt structures can take money from the grant bucket, do loans, do equity positions, impact bonds, whatever, and there can be money flowing back. There can be interest rates, there can be return on investments if it's an equity position. There can money can flow back to the foundation. Now, of course, this problem with the neutrality for competition is still there. So the condition for this money be able to flow back is that the company is active in a space where there is no market yet. Biodiversity as a beautiful example, of course. For example, where there is no functioning market yet. Now, it's still a bit of a question what exactly that means. Do you have to prove that you give money to a startup and there is no market yet? And I would go with Andrea Opel, professor at University in Luzern. She actually wrote the whole analysis that the Canton Zurich based this decision on. And she suggests that, hey, if this is a foundation that is, there is a foundation oversight, there is tax authorities, everybody looks at them. If they do entrepreneurial funding model, let's presume that there is no market there because they are following their purpose and they're doing their job. And I would follow that kind of principle that we presume that if a foundation that has a clear purpose, that is non-profit, that is checked also by the authorities, if they do entrepreneurial models, then that should be cleared without a huge proof of that there is no market yet. Now, there is maybe also the moment to say thank you to all the people that worked really, really hard. And you cannot imagine how many years this took. And there were lots of people in the background, and Swiss foundations took a really crucial role in this. And there was academia, and there were people obviously also within the authorities that were working hard on this for many years. This is a really big change. I cannot underline the importance of this, and we'll come a bit more into details why. Now, there were two other changes. I will not go into them this morning. One was that foundation board members also can be compensated now, and that it's easier now to be internationally active as non-profit, as tax-exempt structures. These are two other changes that were now in this same package, but the really important one, obviously, is that these entrepreneurial funding models now are possible. The importance of this is exactly also because we have the minus 100%. So this capital is the perfect risk capital to do really risky investments. And I will come back to this point in our model, actually. So let's look briefly at where Brainforest was before this decision. So we take grant capital into the tax-exempt structure, into the Brainforest Venture Studio, and then we have two activity streams to build ventures. One is the internal venture building. So we do systems mapping. We look at where leverage points are in the system. And then if we see that we can build a business model around such a leverage points, we incorporate the company. And because we have seen a lot of amazing people that are working on these topics already, especially also in biodiversity now, lots of techies from university, sometimes they do lack a bit of business perspective. So we have a venture program where we collaborate with individuals, with researchers that are wanting to build actually a solution out. It's an 8 to 10 weeks program where we take them through all different kinds of topics, and then we decide at the end if we co-found the company with them, and then they would also become a venture out of our studio. And then once these ventures are incorporated, there is impact investors coming to bring capital to grow it. Now, we also had this problem of the one-way street. We could not give money back to the foundation that actually give us grants. And now we moved our seat to Zurich and also got the tax exemption here in Zurich. And now, so we have now this one-way street that is gone. So what does this mean? We are actually shifting now our model towards recoverable grants. So we go away from pure grants that is just one way foundation give us money. Because if we have successful ventures that we create, that money comes back, we give back some of the money also to the foundation. So we're moving now, we're transitioning our model of Brainforce towards a recoverable grant model. I think it's the first in Switzerland that completely changes now to recoverable grants. So we want to also make a sign here in the market and start kind of educating people. And we will send back money really soon, even if it's just small amounts, because there is a lot of detailed questions. The auditors, the accountants first, then the auditors, the foundation oversight boards, the tax authorities, they need to learn what it means if money from the grant pocket suddenly comes back into a foundation. How do you account for this? So we want to start now. So if you join us in some way or the other, we will start sending you, little money amounts back so that you can start train your crew and the authorities. Now, we do a second thing now. We actually looked at our different options to create a pool of capital as well. Because once our startups are out, you kind of have this empty pocket problem that our startups are always looking for money. Now, the model of Elea, Klima Now, and others. They recycle, or how Lucas von Aurelia, I think he was talking about chicken that lay eggs, and then the eggs, you don't do scrambled eggs, but you make them lay do you make them grow so they lay other chickens? So this is kind of the model that we had so far was a recycling on level of Klima Now, but there was never money flowing back to the foundations that actually provided Elea and the other structures with capital, because it was not allowed. Now we can kind of evolve this model, and what we are launching today is a recoverable grant fund. So we're creating a pot of capital with foundations where we approach you from the, again, grant bucket to put that together to invest in the ventures and then give money back when this is successful. And just also be very, very explicit. The Peter Wuffli and Andreas Kirschläger and the team at Elea, they did incredible important work for years now with the authorities to kind of prepare them slowly for this path. So now we can kind of go behind them and use all the learnings that have been done in this field. Now, we do want to design the details of this fund together with you, because there's lots of questions how we should deal with certain things. We have 3 questions, so now it's the time to take out your mobile phones, especially the grant-making foundations here. We are curious to get your sense. The QR codes are also on the tables if you don't catch it. So the first question, and this is exactly the point which I made before, we intend to send money back early so that you can start learning. Obviously, this will be little amounts. The question is also, when do you expect some more money coming back so that you think that it's kind of relevant as a recoverable grant and not just a normal grant where sometime in the future some money comes back. We will collect your answers as well. The point here being, we want to see in what time frame we should kind of manage and send money back and how much. That was the idea. Let's see now if it works now for everybody with the new question. And here maybe some explanations as well. So if we talk about 0.5x to 0.69x, what do we mean? So if you give us $1 million in recoverable grant into this pot, you would expect 500,000 to 700,000 back. So it would be less than 1x, so that's on this side here. And then on the right side would be, an inflation adjusted 2%. What would be your expectation of returns? Okay, let's do this by show of hands quickly. So let's say that you have a grant pot of 10 million every year that you hand out. What percentage would you allocate to entrepreneurial funding models? For example, recoverable grants, forgivable loans, etc. Less than 10%? Show of hands? Around 10%? Some people read the paper of Opal. Around 20%? I like it. And more than 20%? Fantastic. So actually what Professor Opal, she suggested also that if it's at 10% or below, it's kind of a safe haven, that if foundations, they do 10% of their annual grant budget in entrepreneurial funding models, no worries about that this would be too economical activity or whatsoever. So what I would say is let's get the Swiss foundations, and especially now the Zurich ones that are in the pole position, to move towards 10% of entrepreneurial funding models from their grant pot budget per year. I think now, just very briefly also, this is not new for us. And Isabel from Proevolution actually is here today. We don't do our game with the money, don't worry. Normally we do hand each other money in the space, but I just briefly explain what we did with Proevolution. So Proevolution took from their capital, gave us a forgivable loan. Then we invested this into Xilva. Tim is the CEO of Xilva, is here as well. Thank you. And the contract says that if Xilva is a success, you better be successful, Tim. We give money back to Proevolution. And if Xilva would fail, then we do not have to pay back because we cannot take balance sheet risk as Brainforest. And now is the moment for my confession. And this might come as a bit of a shock to some of you. I am a fundraiser. I was in denial about this for many years, especially the last 4 years, which was basically my only job. Because I had this negative connotation of fundraisers, those annoying beings coming after money, like the police people around here always putting fines on cars. So I had, maybe not that level, but I had this negative connotation towards fundraisers. So I definitely wanted to be one. And then I went to Peru for a month, beginning of this year. And I saw firsthand the urgency of this topic that we are dealing with. I mean, heartbreaking pictures out of the airplane of deforestation. And on the positive side, I saw so many new innovations, startups, new labs popping up in the Amazon rainforest, creating new products, fantastic entrepreneurs. This is in Tarapoto, 2 entrepreneurs who are launching a beautiful chocolate brand. I mean, not Ragusa, that's my gift that I brought them. The other ones where they say that there is lots of orchids, I don't know how you say this in English, orchids that are endangered, and they made a whole biodiversity, beautiful packaging and a whole story around their agroforestry systems for cacao. And then also incredible indigenous leaders that I was able to meet that are very open to collaborate with us, that we were able to build trust, to create business models locally, because they understood that we don't have any chance. If we try to protect, deforestation comes in. There is no way. We need to create business models locally so that the local population actually earns money with the forest and not goes into gold mining and cutting down the forest. It was a very humbling experience as well to see the size of the issue and the reality on the ground. You understand why people are cutting down trees, because you have still, thanks God, you have vast amounts of forests. And then take another hectare for some cacao. You understand the people on the ground because they get for their beans nothing back. So when I'm coming back to Europe, I was really happy about my role as a fundraiser, and now I'm like embodying this. We all have our role to play in this ecosystem, this beautiful biodiverse ecosystem of our planet. And well, my role is fundraising. That's fine. I bring capital to where it creates joy, where it creates systemic impact, where we regenerate nature. So I found my role, apparently, and we have a fantastic team here. And I would just quickly ask, so Tommy, just quickly stand up. Tommy, our Chief Venture Officer since last summer. Kami, Venture Builder in the back there. Let me see where is my team. Julie, Graduate Venture Builder. Joya, where is Joya? Joya is our associate. Then Elijah, who is becoming from an intern now, also an associate, will join our team. And then we have, did I forget somebody? We have our team also abroad. We have Nir in Israel. And the board, from the board here today is Amir Swissa, please stand up quickly, is our new chairman. We have Isabel Sierman-Bodmer from our board as well. And then Susanne, where is Susanne? Susanne Wittig, co-founder and board member as well now of Brainforest. And then we have new now also Dariusz with us here. Investor, founder, startup founder, and is new on our advisory board now. And I have to, and Anton Aschwanden also is on our advisory board. Let's see, I tend to forget people's. Tim, we had as informal support, my wife, Marta. Did I forget someone? Okay. My mom? Yeah, well, I mentioned her, that's enough. And I will come after you now. And since I'm a child, I don't like to hear things that don't sound right. And a no doesn't sound right to me. So I will invite all of you to join us in some way or the other. It doesn't need to be money always. You have network, you have talent, people to join us on this journey. And what does it mean to join us on this journey? So we have two areas where we focus on. One is regenerative food forests, kind of the topic that I said before. There's a lots of wonderful products that you can take out of the forest and bring to markets and create revenue therefore. And then there's ecosystem services like biodiversity that also we start now to see some path to monetize it. We're still far away from a market, but these are these two areas that we are working on. So far we have created 3 ventures and have some that come out of the venture program. This here, Muvuca reforesting large amounts of degraded land in Brazil with agroforestry system. We have Silva creating infrastructure for investments in forests. Biotara, our newest venture, creating oils with the local communities in a franchise-like model so that it can be scaled. We always strive for really scalable models. And then our colleagues in Germany with Eva built a system for reforestation, fully automatized, digital, so that we come away from these problems that we have with Vera and Gold Standard and all these scandals that we had around forest project last year, where there is lots of intransparency and many things going wrong. So there is more in the pipeline, and this is our partners, Amazonia 4.0 in Brazil. They actually bring this technology in the forest, again, with indigenous people that are willing to engage in technology. Not all of them are willing and want to, of course. And we are trying to develop new technologies. For example, here, freeze drying in the forest fruits that perish so quickly you can never bring them to the market. So lots of exciting things ahead. So join us. Our recoverable grant fund I think is also the first one in Switzerland. So lots of first things today. Join us. And now I'm very happy to have Aunnie joining us, because a lot of things we don't know yet, what the tools are that we can use to actually make money flowing back. And Aunnie wrote this amazing book. I can really highly recommend it. I don't get any fees on that, don't worry. It's one of the only books in the last years that I really read from beginning to the end. And before I hand over to Aunnie, I have just one question. Because we have 2 books here to give away. What do you think is the highest multiple that was ever achieved so far on a kind of sustainability-focused startup? And just bring your numbers, and then if you go higher or lower, you can speak up.
100x.
100x. It's like a bidding here. 100x. Loic, 400x.
20.
20x. 40x. Tommy, what's the answer?
So according to ChatGPT research, it's Tesla and 59x.
59x. So we have another one. Well, there, we can figure out another question. Now, let me introduce Aunnie Patton Power, and I will stop screen share here so that you get to see Aunnie. So, Aunnie Patton Power is a university lecturer on innovative finance, impact investing, and technology for impact, an advisor on these topics globally. At the University of Oxford Said Business School, she holds the title Associate Fellow, as well as Entrepreneur in Residence at the Skoll Center for Social Entrepreneurship. She is adjunct faculty at the University of Cape Town, and I think dialing in from South Africa today. Visiting fellow at the London School of Economics Marshall Institute for Philanthropy and Social Entrepreneurship. She's also a founding member of Dazzle Angels, a female angel group, a reformed M&A investment banker, and I would love to get also briefly your story, Aunnie, in a minute. And she began her impact investment career in 2010 with Unitus Capital in Bangalore, and has since worked with startups, intermediaries, funds, family office, foundations, corporates, and governments across Asia, Africa, Europe, and North America. Aunnie's work has been published throughout the world, including by the Oxford University Press, the Stanford Social Innovation Review, the World Economic Forum, and as a massive open online course on Coursera and Get Smarter. Thank you so much, Aunnie, for joining us today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's lovely to be virtually with you all. I'm sorry I'm not there in person. I have a special place in my heart for Zurich. My sister lives there, and so I do enjoy coming. But I am doing this virtually. I'm actually, as I told Leo, on vacation right now. So my daughter and husband are down at the pool while I'm doing this. So in case they come running back, that is the reason. But what I'm going to do today is just give you a bit of an overview of innovative finance. And I know that from what Leo's slides have been, he's talked you through quite a bit of this. I'm very excited about this policy change in Zurich. I've done quite a bit of work with foundations and families in Switzerland in the past, as well as some of the other Nordic countries and in Europe, where there is both a real and perceived risk, as well as regulatory kind of issues that people see. And so having this type of kind of clarity from your regulators is really exciting. And I think it opens up a lot of opportunity to do things that are incredibly innovative. And I think that you're all in a position to really catalyze some incredible change. So I'm going to share my screen here and talk you through a few slides, and then I'd love to have some questions from all of you. And as Leo said, there's lots more in the book and many other places. I'll share lots of links that can be sent out after. So here we go. So, I think the thing is I've been doing this type of innovative financing work for about the past 13, almost 14 years, and really rooted in the idea that both impact investing as well as philanthropy have incredible roles to play in this space, but there's a real need to approach funding for enterprises in a way that is creative and that is also bottom up. So what I like to say is that, there's not a lack of funders and there's not a lack of projects. Really, it's where these meet in the middle. And so over the time that I've worked in this space, what I've really seen is kind of 4 significant issues that really stop this funding from being able to find projects and projects being able to find funding. One is life cycle needs. Projects and businesses and nonprofits go through a life cycle of needing small amounts of capital, larger amounts of capital, different types of capital as they grow. And so often finding funders that are able to provide at the right point can be very difficult. There's also mismatch in the space. So there are funders, foundations that are, making grants available that are very useful for specific things that may not meet the growth needs of a nonprofit or a social business. Similarly, there are venture capital funds providing $5 million checks when actually most organizations need $300,000 working capital checks. So there's a real mismatch that happens. And what happens in our lexicon in the investing world is that, oh, the businesses aren't investable. The answer to that really is no, the businesses don't meet your investment thesis. We don't need to spend all of our time trying to get businesses to meet your investment thesis. Let's maybe think about what actually is available. There's a distribution issue. So because many funders sit far away from where they're trying to invest, getting capital, particularly small checks to organizations, can be difficult. Technology is incredibly helpful here. And then lastly, impact measurement, impact data. So this has come just a tremendously long way, as you all know, since in the past kind of 10, 15 years, particularly the past 2 to 3 years. And so I think it's becoming less of an issue because of the ability to leverage data and be able to collect data much more inexpensively, and the proliferation of pretty easy entry points into collecting data. Still, obviously, a complex and very deep process of figuring out the right types of metrics that to work with organizations, but certainly not the same roadblocks as has been in the past. So the reason that I think innovative financing is important is that we need to approach funding of nonprofits, businesses, projects, entrepreneurs using all available tools. So traditional financial market tools, philanthropic tools, all incredibly important. And if the right tools do not currently exist, I really believe we need to build new ones. And that's really what I've done in my work historically. And this is what I am excited for more and more funders to do. Historically, how we think about funding is we have a funder, let's say a foundation, with a type of financing, let's say grants, that goes out and looks for enterprises and interventions that fits their mandate, and then looks to create the social and environmental outcomes that we are all trying to achieve. Where innovative financing changes things up a little bit is we actually start with the outcomes. So what are we trying to achieve? What social and environmental outcomes are we wanting to actually create? And then what types of funders need to be around the table? Potentially it's a coalition of foundations. Potentially it's foundation and more business-minded family offices. Maybe it's government as well as private sector. And then what type of financing is the most appropriate for this outcome area to be able to meet the needs of enterprises and interventions? It seems like a small shift, but it's quite a significant one to really think about how do we build the types of financing that makes the most sense. And innovative financiers are, as I said, a large group of organizations. So they include foundations and high net worths, as well as development organizations, other nonprofits, social enterprises, institutional investors, governments, corporates, essentially a whole set of people around the table, and impact investors are part of this as well. But the idea is really who needs to be around the table to be able to build what we need for a specific intervention. So when I work with families and foundations and other types of funders on the innovative finance process, we really start with what are these outcome areas that are important to us that we believe need to be addressed. Why are they still an issue? Most of the time people just say, well, money, and that's not always the case. In fact, most of the time it's not just capital. So really understanding the needs and the challenges in those areas, looking at what resources are available or could be available. And then how do we bring innovation into this? How do we find ways to potentially think about business model innovation or different types of financing tools or different types of multi-stakeholder partnerships to be able to design the right tool or set of tools for a specific outcome area? So what I'm going to talk with you about today, and we'll take questions and we'll direct you to lots of other resources, is really this toolkit of ways in which you can think about as funders the different tools that sit in your arsenal. How I like to think about these is structures, processes, and incentives. So on the structures side, you have different investment structures, and this is really what the policy change talks to within the Zurich tax exemption, is the different types of investment structures you can now use. You also have capital structures, so different types of fund structures. And this, for all of you, will be the types of potentially fund investments that you may make. You may invest in funds like the one that Leo is working on now as well, or other types of legal structures, also potentially at the fund or the enterprise level. Now, there's also a whole set, and we're not going to have time to dive into it today, but there's a whole set of things to think about around your own processes. So how is bias involved in how you select deals, how you do diligence on deals, how you manage your portfolio? I'm going to just really quickly touch on thinking about exits. There's also considerations around governance. And then finally, incentives. So how are internally your own individuals in your organizations incentivized, and how do you build impact incentives into contracts? And we'll talk about that briefly around impact linked funds. This is going to be quick. I teach, as some of you know, I teach a full week-long course at Oxford that I can't fit everything into. So whenever I do these kind of half-hour, 1-hour intros, it's always tough to kind of smush everything into one. But it will be a taster session as always. So why do we innovate around investment structures? Why is it even important that the policy change has come into play? Well, the fact of the matter is that a lot of startups, and particularly impact startups, don't qualify for traditional debt from banks. And this is true whether you're in Switzerland or you are in South Africa, or you're in Kenya or Indonesia. It doesn't matter. The US. Equity can be very useful for some businesses. Equity capital, so venture capital equity, was designed specifically for a tiny proportion of businesses. And these are businesses that are asset light, highly scalable, tech enabled, and essentially seeking exponential growth. Now, that is a small percentage of businesses. The problem is that within the investment community and even in the impact investing community, we have taken Silicon Valley equity as the only type of risk capital that is available for most organizations. And this means that we are taking social enterprises that are going to be hopefully sustainable growth social enterprises and pushing them into a venture capital style equity bucket. And on top of the kind of exponential growth issues, venture capital equity also has a really exclusive and terrible history with racial and gender diversity. I'm sure many of you know the numbers, but in Europe, less than 3% of venture capital goes to female-founded companies. And in the UK, where the latest numbers that I have, less than 0.2% goes to women of color founded companies. So I don't know about you, but I personally do not feel that reflects the talent distribution in the world. And so there's something really about the structure there, I believe, as well as the processes that has that issue. Now, I love grants. I work with them all the time. I think they're amazing. They can be super useful. But for a lot of social enterprises, using grants to scale is not effective for many reasons that you all know. They can be difficult to get repeatedly because justifiably you want to use your capital to be very catalytic. They can come with quite stringent reporting requirements and usage requirements that don't necessarily fit some organizations' growth trajectory. And they can just be hard to get. And once you have one, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get another one. So what I'm just going to talk you through quickly are some of the options that you now have as funders that can meet some of the challenges that many social enterprises face and nonprofits too face in the space. So moving beyond debt and equity and grants, there's a whole set of tools within the toolkit. And I'm not going to go through all of these today, but as Leo has said, my book goes through each of these in detail and talks about how they are used and some of the best practices around them. I've also created several very extensive resource libraries, including the Innovative Finance Playbook, as well as Adventure Finance Online Companion, that have lots of different templates and use cases and kind of some legal work that I've done with organizations, including in Switzerland around some of these. So Leo mentioned the forgivable loans. Another name for forgivable loans, slightly different, is recoverable grants. Very similar to the work that Brainforest is doing, the Reciprocity Fund in the US, which invests into Latin America, uses recoverable grants to be able to provide $25,000 to $75,000 loans to social enterprises. The reason that recoverable grants are so important to this model, and the reason I think they work incredibly well in the funding for nonprofit funds space, is that there are, as many of you know, a whole set of organizations that do not qualify for market rate. And I mean, I have a whole issue with market rate, especially when you're like building new markets and the market misprices things all the time. But that aside, many organizations that do not qualify for market rate loans, and even if they did, the rate at which they would qualify would make their businesses non-viable. So we are talking about in many areas globally, and not just in developing markets, where women, people of color, indigenous people, people that have less of an educational background are seen as much higher risk than the traditional people that walk through the door that look like the bank manager wants them to look. So their loans are priced very differently. And it means that, you know, a female entrepreneur who's running a sustainable business cannot access the type of capital she needs to be able to grow that business, even sometimes working capital to be able to continue functioning. So there's a place for capital, whether it's grant capital or kind of capital that's looking for a much lower return, to be able to go into this market, to be able to provide for many of these organizations a opportunity to build a credit history and access to capital that actually reflects their true risk as well as the impact they are creating. So recoverable grants and forgivable loans, look at this and say, you can look at it from a glass half full or a glass half empty perspective. From a glass half empty perspective, you would say, well, we're investing this money, but we're only getting, say, 70% of our principal back. From a glass half full perspective, you can say, we are using this money catalytically and we're getting 70% of our capital back. So it really does depend on how you're framing it and how you're thinking about this. And these can be done, recoverable grants and forgivable loans can be done at the enterprise level as well as at the funds level. Just a technical note here. From a tax perspective, recoverable grants to for-profit entities can be very tricky because the entity will have to declare the income as income, as grant income, and pay taxes on it. So if at some point they have to pay it back to you, there's a mismatch there. So what I suggest in pretty much every jurisdiction I've worked with is that you use recoverable grants when you're working with nonprofit entities, where you can do a grant agreement with a side letter about the recoverability of the grant. And you use forgivable loans when you're working with for-profit entities. So the loan is then made to the entity. And then if you write off a portion of the loan, only then does the entity have to essentially declare that as income. So a little bit technical, but it's just good to know the reason to be able to use those. Another type of instrument that I think that hopefully you all are interested in is impact-linked loans. So the example I have here is UBS. I believe there's someone from UBS in the room, done a lot of work with UBS in the past. And this is one of the loans that they have done with Jacaranda Maternity, which is a Kenyan-based maternity hospital. And what they did was to actually link the loan, a $600,000 loan to open up some new clinics, to 3 outcome metrics that were chosen by Jacaranda Maternity. So the more Jacaranda delivered on the ratio of essentially poor women that were customers, as marked by their eligibility for essentially the national health insurance, the quality ratings that they chose, and the safety ratings they chose, the more they performed on that, the cheaper the cost. So this is a very simple structure. Some of you may have heard of social impact bonds, which is mentioned in the legislation, and development impact bonds, also very interesting, but very complex. Impact-linked loans, you can do as a foundation very easily and very simply. I like this example because it is simple and it's easy, and it actually was relatively inexpensive to put together, because what UBS did, which was very smart, is they worked with Jacaranda for them to set the 3 metrics with data they were already collecting. And instead of UBS spending a ton of money on a data verification system, what UBS has in their contract is the right to a social audit. So they can go in at any point and audit the data that Jacaranda has given to them around the interest rate to be able to verify that that data is correct. That means that the extra cost to UBS here is almost nil. So they have a relatively standard loan contract with them that the interest is calculated on a quarterly basis based off of the performance. And to date, Jacaranda has paid about 1% interest based off of their ability to achieve the outcomes that have been set up for them. Now, a couple of other ones that I want to mention briefly that you may want to think about with your funding. Another one that's very simple is something called revenue-based financing. Now, this is growing globally as an option for often high growth businesses that don't want to take venture capital. It can also be used with high margin but slower growing businesses that want to access this type of funding. All it is financing that takes into account the previous 3 to 6 months of revenue and is repaid by future revenue. So a lot of enterprises can't access debt because they don't have collateral. And so instead of requiring collateral, what revenue-based financing requires is essentially your proof of revenue. So this works for post-revenue businesses that have high enough margins to be able to pay this back. This is an example in India of a bike sharing company that does the technology for bike sharing companies. They were able to access the capital they needed to expand to 3 more cities. And then they paid back Advantage, which is a revenue-based financing provider in India, as a percentage of their revenues going forward. I also worked with, during COVID, for instance, several families and foundations to help implement revenue-based financing during COVID, because you can't default on a revenue-based financing agreement if you're not making any money. So it was the perfect opportunity to push capital out, because the repayment is a percentage of your revenue. So what they were able to do was to actually push this type of capital out, it not overburden the businesses, and only once the businesses were able to make money again were they able to actually pay back the loans. And the pricing here can be, market rates. Again, have a problem with that term, but or it can be much lower. So you can be looking for, just your principal back that will be paid back in a very flexible way. The last structure I'll put up here is redeemable equity. This is an opportunity, I think those of you that are thinking about potentially using foundation assets for equity, to get into an equity relationship, potentially without having some of the downsides and the requirements of traditional Silicon Valley capital. So what redeemable equity does is it allows a funder, in this case Pledge, which is an accelerator, to buy shares in My Turn, which is a lending library. And My Turn then has the option to repurchase those shares from Pledge. This is part of a type of funding that I call structured exits, where when you're going in that what the exit looks like on the other side. So there's a few different options for this. So either My Turn might actually buy all those shares back in the future based off of kind of some sort of upfront price or a fair market value, or they might buy back shares as a percentage of revenue over time, or some sort of combination. But what it means, and this is the numbers, don't get too worried about these. I mean, these slides are absolutely to share. Leo will be able to send them to all of you. And this is all in the book and online and everything. But what in this case it meant is that My Turn was able to take this very early stage risk capital and actually buy out Pledge over 7 years, and never took on more venture capital, didn't want to. The founder had worked actually in California and Silicon Valley for big venture-backed companies, and he had seen what the venture capital made the companies do from a lifestyle perspective, from a growth perspective, from a mentality perspective, and he didn't want that. He wanted to build a good, sustainable business that was focused on helping neighborhoods access the tools that they needed in the areas that they needed. And so he was able to use the revenues from the business to repurchase Pledge's shares. And then once they were purchased, the relationship ended. And Pledge made about 4 times their money back, which is a great return for them. Is a kind of depending on the calculation, somewhere around 15% IRR. But for My Turn, they got what they wanted out of it. Pledge got what they wanted out of it as well. All right, I'm going to end in a moment because I know you've been sitting for a long time and I want to have some questions. But just the last 2 things I wanted to mention. So one was that some of you will actually think about doing, in addition to doing direct deals, will think about doing investments into funds, and some of you may already do that. And so there's a lot of different ways in which you can use your capital to be catalytic within funds. One of them is using guarantees, and this can be done at the deal level or at the funds level. And I personally think guarantees are one of the most underutilized tools in foundations toolkits. Guarantees allow you to utilize your balance sheet or a pool of capital to be able to help organizations access capital or access capital at a cheaper rate. So this example of the Global Health Investment Fund, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and SIDA, the Swedish International Development Agency, used a guarantee on a fund to be able to crowd in it ended up being actually closer to $100 million of commercial capital into an investment area of essentially late stage development of new global health products. Now, this was way pre-COVID, but they were trying to make the case that it's in everyone's interest to be able to be seen in particularly emerging market diseases that are completely underinvested in. Instead of putting their own money in, as they had been doing in the past, they used a guarantee to source other types of capital in to be able to hopefully build a track record. This is the same way you can use guarantees on a direct level. You can build guarantee pools, you can do individual guarantees to help organizations that want to build a credit history to be able to access bank financing and other types of capital. They can be incredibly powerful and a really useful way to use your balance sheets. All right, I'm not going to go into legal structures, but there's lots here. This is the book I'm working on right now. It's, I would say, about 50% done, looking on alternative fund structures. And so looking at legal structures and capital structures and how we can engage with ones that really embed impact into them. So I'm going to skip through a couple of these. The second to last point I would like to make, I realize I said that once already, but this is the actual second to last point I would like to make, is just thinking about the type of exit, if you're working with, whether it's equity or even with businesses that you're doing kind of loans with, et cetera, really thinking about who owns what. And this is I think for me, this is one of the next frontiers within impact finance. We've done a really, I would say, great job in the space of moving people at the bottom of the pyramid from beneficiaries to producers and consumers through business models, through nonprofits that are focused on buying and selling affordable services. But where we have failed thus far is moving individuals from producers and consumers to holders of wealth. And assets are I don't have to tell a group of people sitting in Zurich that assets are the most important parts of moving towards middle-class wealth, however you want to frame it. And so, really thinking about with the organizations that you fund, if they are, social enterprises, or even if they're nonprofits, how they are actually helping individuals to not just become better consumers, but actually build wealth. One of the ways to think about this is who owns those businesses. Who owns those assets? Maybe they're real estate assets, small lending assets like farming vehicles, et cetera. And how potentially as funders can you help facilitate greater ownership? And this can be things like exiting to communities, which a lot more organizations are looking at, different types of ownership there. Things like cooperatives. The example of Patagonia is actually creating a trust and being owned by the environment to be able to be stewarded from that. The actual last thing that I would like to say is just thinking about incentives. So last year we did a piece of work that you can access, the Impact Link compensation report. You can find it at impactlink.co, where we looked at essentially the world of impact-linked compensation, particularly for fund managers, but also has, I think, some really good learnings for family offices and foundations, thinking about how your own individual compensation structures work. And this will particularly be important, those of you that are going to start moving from using grants, moving into some of these more innovative structures. How do you make sure that the incentives for the individuals that are working with you or individuals you're investing in remain really aligned to the impact that you want to build, as opposed to suddenly kind of looking at what is the opportunity to make a financial return. And so it's about thinking about what do these structures look like, and we have over 100 mini case studies of organizations throughout the space that have found ways to integrate impact into the compensation of their organizations. Okay, I will actually stop there. That was a ton of information. I say that every time I do a presentation, which is a lot. But if it's possible, I'd love to just open it up for some questions or comments, if that's all right, Leah.
Yes, absolutely. Before we get settled with the microphone, maybe you can just share how an M&A investment banker ended up in Impact.
I came of age in the investment banking industry when everything was just kind of going to the dogs, right? So 2006, 2007. And in 2008, a good friend of mine gave me a book by Muhammad Yunus called A World Without Poverty. And it really just completely changed my outlook. And then I saw that impact investing wasn't even like really coined yet. The term was just being coined, but this idea of using finance for good. So I ended up quitting my job, turning down the private equity offer, and working my way around the world, finally kind of ending up in India, working with an organization called Unitas Capital that does incredible work. It was the first investment bank for social enterprises in the world. And I was just hooked. So once I realized I could use the skills that I was good at, investment banking, to make, for, totally corny, the world a better place. It was just, that was the beginning of it. But what I found right away was that the term sheets I was working on looked exactly the same to the private equity and other term sheets I had been working on when I was, sitting in New York and Chicago in the States. And so from that very first, the first deals that I did in the space, I was like, nah, something has to be different. We can't just be replicating the financial market. There has to be fundamentally some different way in which we allocate capital in this space. And that's really what's driven me for the past 14-ish, wow, a long time. It's been a long time. Years. It's like, how do we build structures and processes and incentives that actually are embedded with impact, as opposed to just having impact as an output.
Awesome. Well, we are very happy that you did this change. Now, questions. We have a mic here, so please, Cécile.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. Very interesting, both of you. Cécile Bicani from React. And my question is, we've been talking about blended finance for a couple of years and the potential that has to unlock capital from the private sector through this catalytic funding from the foundation. How is this new law going to help accelerate that? Does it make a difference, or are we talking about two different things that exist in parallel?
It's a really good question. So how many of you work with government regularly? Few people in the room? Yeah, is it a fun experience? So I think there's a few things with blended finance. I think that you're completely right, and that we've talked about its potential for a long time. And I do think, certainly there are billions and billions of dollars being done in the blended finance space, and I hope that will continue to grow. I think the opportunity of the new law is it doesn't always require foundations to pull commercial funders into a transaction or a fund. There are different ways to be catalytic. So for instance, you might decide that doing kind of early stage risk capital in a way that is kind of very responsible, in the sense of, not taking the bets that traditional venture capitalists wouldn't take, backing founders that look different, sound different, have different ideals, use different instruments that don't require them to be exponential. You may help build a set of organizations that can fit into more mainstream capital. And so instead of trying to pull all of those banks or the government, or really large institutions into some of these deals, which is what blended finance often requires, you actually may be seeding these organizations that go on to kind of stand on their own 2 feet in the market. And so that may be how you're catalytic. There are certainly opportunities for you to use your capital within, to pull organizations in. But what I would say is don't wait for everyone else. Because what happens, and what I've seen happen in this space, is that we try and build the perfect instrument, or we try and build the perfect fund, or we try, it's just really big blended finance transactions are amazing, and when they work well. But there are so many, including ones I've been involved with, that take such a long time to get to market. The question is would it have been better to potentially do something simpler, quicker, and actually have the capital going out? And so I think absolutely engaging in those conversations, and I think the law will help that. But I would just say, for those of you in the room, like, you don't need a massive foundation, a government, a huge institutional funder alongside you to be really creative and innovative and potentially super catalytic. You can do things in small checks, you can do things with each other, you can do things with other arms. Some of you have family offices, etc., that are quicker, nimbler, and get capital out, because the world doesn't need perfect right now. The world needs change, and it needs people to be doing things kind of today as opposed to in 2 or 3 years from now. So absolutely, go for it, build some of these things, but you all have the type of capital that you can get out the door relatively quickly. And I would say use this opportunity to be innovative, to do that, to test things, try it out, and allow organizations potentially to even make mistakes and come back to you.
Thank you, Aunnie. And I can only second that. And that's why we just start now. We don't know exactly how everything will work. And that's why I said also, like, join us for the Recoverable Grant Fund. We start sending money back, and you can discuss with your auditors like how to deal with this. This is really, that's why we're starting, and not trying now for 2 years to theorize around it. And thank you, Cecile, for the question. Any other questions? Joshua.
Hi, Joshua from Restore and Second Mile Foundation. Given that foundations often want to be philanthropic and are in the absurd situation that they're struggling to give away their money, my intuition about impact-linked loans would be to incentivize best practice with maybe negative interest rates if they meet all the agreed upon markers. I was wondering if you've seen that before, if it worked out, and if you'd advise against it or support it.
Do it. No, absolutely do it. I think that so there's this spectrum between recoverable grants, impact linked loans, it's this whole, as Leo said, this whole space in between, right? It's very unexplored. So whether you call it a forgivable loan or you call it an impact linked loan, but if you're going below that, we think immediately when we put our investment hats on, we think we start from 100% principal up, right? And we kind of ignore the rest of that. And so absolutely encourage organizations, set, specific outcomes metrics, and then encourage organizations to go above and beyond. Have them earning back, you can even do it. There's ways, and you'll see in the book, there's ways to even do this with equity if you want to, where you actually have them earn back. You can put an equity investment in, they hit all of their outcome metrics, and actually they completely earn back your the share that you've given them. Or from a loan perspective, they can earn it all the way down. So absolutely. And I think there's just, I would say, be very mindful about picking with the organization, choosing metrics that make sense for the organization, making them, as simple and as cost effective to collect, and, making sure that, you continue to have, be in conversation with those organizations. But yes, absolutely do it. Because one of the things that's useful about a loan for a lot of organizations is once they've had a few loans, they can go to a bank and they can say, here's my credit history. I have repaid these loans, and variable rate interest loans is something that happens. It's just normally not about impact, but it's normally about other things. And so if we have, whether it's a nonprofit or a social enterprise, and we start building these credit histories for them to be able to access bank finance, that means more capital available from all of you to other organizations, as opposed to these ones that now can access this bank finance. So yes, I would say what I normally say at the end of these talks is like, time to be courageous. Like there is nothing now from a legal perspective and a regulatory perspective. There's very little holding you all back. Most people in the world, there actually is less holding them back than they think. But the rules around how we're supposed to allocate capital were made up by people that were trying to maintain status quo. There's no reason that we need to, hew by like traditional rules. So your job as a foundation is to encourage impact. So create opportunities for these organizations to just, blow it out of the water and like get rewarded for that. That's awesome.
I did forget to say one thing, and Stefan Schöbe is just about to walk out of the door, I think, warned me that you need to leave earlier. So now I catch you. Because at the beginning of Brainforest, it was also very vague what we wanted to do, and we didn't know exactly our model. And Stefan trusted, back then still with Micro Pionierfonds, now CEO of Stiftung Schweiz. And then Robin is also in the room, took over and continued trusted us, even though things were going very different than we had planned. So thank you to you. Really, that was the beginning. And then Proevolution joined, and so Maha joined, and who else do we have of our foundation support? And Fondation Valérie is one of our newer partners here. And Freight Charitable Foundation, yes, with a full Power Women crew here today. Also being brave and kind of ignoring that there might be the authorities that don't like everything that we are doing. Now we have the full backing, and I really appreciate Aunnie, and thank you for being with us today. Your words of let's just try and not wait now until the tax authorities have sent around a new tax ruling like the one that from 1994. 1994 is the last one that actually keeps us awake now of tax exemption. And I think Andrea Opel did it really. So she is the one that professor of Luzern who wrote the analysis that now the Canton of Zurich based this decision on, and she kind of hinted at it. Hey, maybe it's time now to update some of those old rulings. So let's do this, and what it means. So there are two ways, mainly of course with capital, that you can now engage with us. One is, as we say, not grants anymore, recoverable grants. So you can join us for our venture studio with grants. There, I do not expect to pay back a multiple of 1x plus, because a lot of the things that we are trying don't work, and we also have to be aware of that and just live with that. On the other side, the recoverable grant fund that we are now starting to put together, there it will be ventures that are de-risked in a sense that we either have built them ourselves, tested them, our investment committee went through it several times, and we're kind of more confident that it will work. There, our target clearly is to have 1x and above. So there are either recoverable grants where we will start sending you money back really soon that you can get all the learnings that we need right now, or then on the recoverable grant fund where it's a more long-term element, but we also obviously will start money sending back as soon as we have some dividends or we sold some shares or anything. So thank you for coming this morning. It was supposed to be a small breakfast roundtable at Cafe Bar Black, kind of went out of proportion. So thank you for coming and your interest in this topic, obviously. Please share these new rules. I know that Swiss Foundations just had a wonderful event on this as well. So the word is getting out. That's very good. Please also share about Brainforest. We are still looking for money, and I'm a fundraiser, so please come. Share this with others. If you don't have money yourself, just share it with the other people that this actually is an exciting model now that we all can learn together. So with this, we still have the space until lunchtime here, so feel free to get some more food and continue the conversation, and if you need to leave, then have a wonderful day. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Aunnie, so much, and we will release you to the pool now. Wonderful. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.